prior meetings. All the issues and questions that have been presented to us in the last several meetings has been clarified by them in a very clear and direct manner, making sure that people understand what the difference was, what were the changes, what did they look at, why didn't they not look at ROPs? All that has been answered today. This is a very strong report. At the end of the day, the law of the land stands. This is state law that we're getting into that makes things a lot more difficult for us. And we are on a local level. Our hands are tied. If we want to get this addressed in the proper manner, we need to start addressing things at the state level and pushing for changes and reform to be able to assist us on a local level. But the housing cases, the cases that are in court right now, speaks volumes to those other cities and their job. That means, and that shows us, they did not do their due diligence. They misinterpret laws. They didn't do what they needed to do. We did that. We should support this report. We should support the staff that did this, be grateful, and just thank you, because this is an opportunity for us to move forward. If we're going to invest into another study, we can do that. But the report is accurate. The conversation, in my opinion, should not be on the integrity of the report, more so what is the decision moving forward with the information we have received. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Mr. Ballard.
So, to be clear, nobody is questioning the integrity of the staff. Nobody. Nobody is questioning the hard work that was done by these men and women for our city. Nobody. I want to make sure that is very, very clear. But even looking at the numbers, when you look that 71% of the landlords misinformed the city, 71%, that is the data that's in front of us, gave misinformation to the city when it comes to claiming that they're exempt. It is not unreasonable to then question the other information that they've given us, especially when we know that we're in a housing crisis that we all agree on. So I got 3 quick questions. I guess question number 1. A lot of work was done to verify that 29% of the properties were exempt. Is that something that the state requires, or is that something that we did on our own efforts?
I apologize. Could you repeat that question?
So for the exceptions, 164 properties claimed that they had an exemption. Is it the state requirement that the municipality has to prove that they're exempt, or is it that the property owner has to prove that they're exempt? Or is it vague?
Honestly, it's not spelled out in state law. The state law says that those properties are exempt from ETPA and from the survey. Some property owners, some property owners would not be able to prove their exemptions, even though those exemptions are real, again, because of extenuating circumstances. We had property owners who just purchased their building from the previous owner who told us, I know that this has been substantially renovated. The previous owner has that information. I don't have it. You guys would have a copy of that in your permits and in your files. And a few of them offered to help us search through it. We were already down there. We were already able to locate it. But yeah, that's not something that they would necessarily be able to do on their own. Whether, it is not specifically spelled out in state law whose responsibility it is per se, but we asked property owners for information. Some of them provided that information to us or told us exactly where to look, and we were able to confirm that.
Okay. But the state doesn't say we have to. It doesn't require the municipality. Am I wrong to say that?
I mean, if we took them at their word, right, if it was the property owner's prerogative to, you know, we would have to take them at their word, and that vacancy rate would have been even higher. I don't know that that would have worked out well for us and for a lower vacancy rate, to be honest with you.
Did other municipalities do the research, or did they leave it at the property owner to prove that they should have been exempt?
Other municipalities did do some of that research, but again, they had much smaller, number of buildings to look at, so it was much easier for them. 60 buildings, you know, I could do that in my sleep, honestly. I could, with the experience I've had doing this study, I could do, you know, the study that Poughkeepsie did relatively quickly. But we had, you know, we had hundreds of them. So it's a much different scale we're talking about here.
And that took a lot of time. Am I wrong to say that? That took a lot of time, a lot of energy?
No, it took a lot of time.
Yeah, it did take a lot of time. Yeah.
It did take a lot of time, yes.
And I think it's still really important for us to all remember that even if we included those properties into the vacancy rate, it would not be below 5%. So, I mean, even if Sam didn't do that work and we just lumped them all in there would be no chance that it would be below 5%.
But that took a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of effort. And with that effort, we found that 71% of those who were making this claim were giving us inaccurate information. I think that's important for people to understand, that when you're asking people to give you information that is not going to benefit them, there's a good rate they're going to give you not the best information. So that's why I want to make sure that there's a clear difference, because I think what I'm hearing is like if those who are asking for a second look at this is questioning or berating or belittling the effort, the work, and the integrity of the department, and that's not the case. We're questioning the information that was reported to the department. The department has very limited control over. If I am correct, the fine for lying on this is $1,000, $1,200?
I believe it's 500. Yeah, it's 500.
So it's a $500 fine. It's a $500 fine for lying on this. So the risk and return is great. The risk is low, the return is huge on a landlord for that, and that's the economics. If this was a $50,000 fine, the economics may not work for a landlord to take the risk of not giving the proper information. So I think it's important for us to understand that the economics is also in favor of the landlords to not give us the most accurate information.
I think you're misstating the number of property owners that claimed a substantial renovation. And I would also say, you know, there was someone, a member of this body, who was insinuating that we were politically motivated in completing the study and said so in the Times-Union. Just want to make that clear.
Well, that wasn't me. And if that's the case, that person has to speak for themselves. I know I have publicly and privately have made the distinction very, very clearly. So I've had lots of jobs in my life, everything from a Power Ranger and a Ninja Turtle to customer service to making phone calls, telemarketing, and so on. So I know how people can treat people on the other line when they don't know who they are and they don't have them face to face. So when I read the abuse that our staff took from these landlords, I felt it. Because I know how it was to be on the other line. And you're just doing your job. So I'm sorry that you guys went through that. And I'm sorry if anyone else made anything that when that loud. But that hasn't been anything that's come from myself and from others who are saying there's nothing bad with having another set of eyes look at this. And I guess that's where where I guess my passion comes out, because I feel like it's like, well, it's an attack. Like it's diverting the conversation from you know, from the accuracy of the information that was given versus like if it's a attack on the people who gathered that information. And I just want to make it clear that that's, at least I can say for myself, and I think for other people that support, that's not the case. You know, and I apologize. And actually, I'm not going to apologize for anybody else. That's not my job. I didn't make that comment, so I'm not going to apologize for other people's comment. I'll take my own accountability. Okay. You know, I didn't make those comments, but I did make. But I do believe there's nothing wrong with having another set of eyes on this.
So I guess I have two questions, and one is probably not going to go over well. And that is, if the vacancy rate in our report had come in below 5%, would we be sitting here right now? My second question is, Councilmember Zamer asked us what we thought we could do to make it a better study. What could a consultant do to make it better? I guess I'm going to ask you, what does it look like to you to have that extra set of eyes? Like, I don't understand. I don't know what a consultant could do to go out to check all of these properties that we haven't done.
So, I guess one thing I'd like to find out, and one of my questions that was going to be was, is there anything in the state law that prohibits us from stating that properties or units are not habitable and shouldn't count? So is there anything that prevents us from saying a unit is not habitable and shouldn't count towards a vacancy?
And I mean, are you saying that if they don't have an ROP? Is that what you're getting at? So what was written in those concerns was that we counted properties that were vacant that didn't have an ROP. It didn't mention the fact that we didn't count properties that were not vacant and didn't have an ROP. So if we're going to look at that, we've got to look at it on both sides. You can't just take the vacant properties and say, oh, they don't count because there's no ROP.
And that's a good reason to look at that. You know, for me, if the state allows us to state that a property is not habitable, and because we state a property is not habitable, then that property shouldn't count against the vacancy study. You know, that to me would have different effects. I think if, you know, I think the lawyer wants to say something, so if he's going to say that the state does not allow us to say that a city's not, you know, that a vacant unit is not habitable and that we can't count it towards a vacancy, I'd rather him say that than I continue talking and dig myself in a hole.
No, not at all. No, I don't know the answer to that question, to be perfectly honest. I don't know if there is, I don't think there is anything in state law that makes that determination. I don't know if that determination has been made. And I just wanted to acknowledge your point. I hear what you're saying about not being able to trust the data that's coming in. I totally hear that point. I think that goes to Sam's larger point of the ETPA survey being an imperfect tool. Right? It's a survey at the end of the day, and that's the tool that the state gave us to be able to conduct this vacancy study. So at a certain point, we are bound by answers that people give us, just like a consultant would, just like anyone else doing a survey would. That's the tool that we have at the end of the day. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I totally hear the point that you're saying.
Yeah, I don't think we would contest that it's an imperfect tool by any means.
I'm gonna
Okay,
be quiet
all right.
now. Thank you.
Ms. Frederick, Ms. Zamer, and then we're going to finish up.
Thank you. I know this is a long discussion, but I think it's a needed discussion. I know we also have finance after this, but I do appreciate everyone's thoughtful questions on this topic because it is a budgetary item we are potentially considering. So it's good to have these questions aired out. I guess my question right now after this conversation is if we're questioning the integrity of the data coming in, kind of to Commissioner Andrews' point, what would a second study change in that? Like, if a consultant were to do a second study, if we are questioning the truthfulness of the responses, wouldn't the landlord respond the same? I don't know, and maybe there's something in there I'm missing, but I don't know how the results would change. And if the problem is the penalty for lying, then we have no control over that. So it sounds like that's more so the state, and to Councilmember Adams' point, should be advocating at the state level for changes to this because it is flawed and we want to make sure we're getting good data in. I just don't see how anything changes on the potential path we're taking in terms of questioning the integrity of the responses coming in. So any thoughts,
I can't say I wouldn't disagree with that. I don't know. I don't know what a consultant would necessarily do differently than what we did. And, we certainly wouldn't disagree that the state legislation could use some editing. I think we pointed out several areas where the state legislation wasn't particularly helpful. So we wouldn't disagree with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I would, on the topic of this is an important budgetary item that we're discussing, I would love to get council members' thoughts here tonight on, I assume some of you will be leaving shortly, but generally, are we supportive of a second study? Are we not supportive of a second study? Are we supportive at a later time? So if there's any quick
Why don't
feedback we can get, that would
let
be great.
Ms. Zamer finish, then let them go, and then we'll, real quick.
Thank you, and that was exactly my question / point, is if we don't, if there are those that don't trust the information, the data that's coming from the property owners, I don't know how even an independent study is going to be paid by the city. I don't know how that would make landlords more truthful. That's what I don't understand. But that was the same point.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Andrews and Mr. Wells and Chris from the Law Department.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for your work
Thank you for
and
your
for
work.
this information here tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that being said, Mrs. Frederick's comment before about kind of just a general idea of where folks are with this, I guess just a simple right for finance, right?
But to take that poll right now, and there's a number of members that aren't here, I don't think that would be a fair.
So then sorry, not to talk out of term, if everyone could individually reach out to me, the thing I'm here with is we have a lot of items on budget that we're discussing, and tomorrow I'm talking with the administration about the total amount we're requesting, and that could be a point of conflict where we have a lot of items and potentially don't have the so I just want to get a sense of, are we including this and are we not? So we don't have to do the poll now if people are against it, but if you could individually let me know as finance chair, that would be great.
Well, you can poll the people that are here and follow up with those that aren't. Well, the majority of us are here.
Yeah, that's fine. We could just simple show of hands of folks in support of the second study.
I have to say, I really want to have our discussion at the Finance Committee meeting before that's
Oh,
just
oh,
me personally, so.
yeah.
So I'm not weighing in one way or another
Right.
on it.
So that gives you kind of a rough idea. You got the show
Well,
of
you
people
have
in
to
support.
ask, don't you have to ask who's against, don't you have to ask who's against it if you asked who's for
Well,
it?
yeah, just assume that everyone that didn't put
Because,
their
I
hand
mean,
up is
somebody's
against.
abstaining,
Okay,
so.
yeah, show of hands for folks who are against the second. And again, standing with the people that are for a second study, it has nothing to do with our staff. I trust our departments, our employees implicitly, so that's not it. And I'm sure it's the same for other members that voted in favor of it. But now, show of hands for folks that don't want to do the second. Okay, and then you'll get the rest of the feedback from others. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, so then just into our, because we still have caucus. I'll just run through this stuff real quick. Under minutes from a previous meeting, November 4th, 2024. If I'll be offering those. Hopefully they'll be ready and I can get them out. So that's that. Under local laws, skip to local law K of 2024. It's the local law overriding the tax levy. That is in committee tonight to be discussed. Pending the outcome of that, we'll be moving forward with that. The next,
Kelly,
under
can you,
ordinances.
I hate to stop you, and I know it's late, but I don't understand. I thought we had passed something on this with the tax levy. Was that for last year, like for 2024? Now we're looking at 2025?
No, you're talking, wasn't that setting homestead and, yeah, it was different. It wasn't.
This is different.
This is different.
I'm not sure what you're referring to, Councilmember Hoey, but we didn't do this last year.
Local law K has been requested by the department. I think maybe Gideon might have more information on that, the override of the tax levy. This is new.
Oh, I know what, okay. I'm thinking about the share between
Right, homestead,
homestead and
non-homestead.
non. And that has nothing to do with this.
Correct.
This is, we want to raise it. Got it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's on this packet instead. Or no, sorry, further down the page on the same packet.
And just a quick note on the proportions. There was just a typo in the number originally, so that might just need to be amended at Monday's meeting.
Thank you. All right, so that'll be in finance after this meeting. Then next, under ordinances introduced by Mr. Robinson, the ordinance authorizing sale of it's got a tax map. It doesn't have the address. It's area between Livingston and 3rd Street to selling it to the Underground Railroad. That'll be going to finance. It's ordinance 67-112-24 by Mr. Robinson. Referral to finance. And next, under ordinances, Ms. Frederick's ordinance 28-101-24, it's the budget ordinance. Again, up for discussion. Pending the outcome, we may or may not be moving forward with it. That's in finance. The next, on to the resolutions introduced by Ms. Keegan, Resolution 125, 112-24R, resolution of the council in support of a unified Ireland. That's pretty self-explanatory, but do you want to?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we can do that one out of order on Monday because the AOH is coming to receive a formal copy of the resolution.
Mr. President, is that okay? Take it out of order, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Next, by Mr. Hoey, Resolution 126, 112-24R, it's a resolution honoring and celebrating the achievements of Albany High Falcons boys varsity soccer team. Mr. Hoey.
Yeah, and I'm wondering also, can we take this out of order? Because we are going to try to get the team in with the coaches. if the president doesn't mind.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Mr. Flynn's Resolution 127, 112, 24 hours resolution of council recognizing November 2024 as Epilepsy Awareness Month. We're typically all co-sponsors on that, so we should be able to do a voice vote on that one. The next, by Mr. Adams, Resolution 128, 112, 24 hours resolution, the council honoring life and legacy of Jeffrey Fryer and renaming a portion of Slingerland Street in his honor. That will be a referral to General Services Committee.
Excuse me. So because of the tighter timeline with regards to that resolution, Councilmember Adams had asked if we could have that discussed at the General Services meeting on Monday prior to caucus. So it'd be sort of an introduction on behalf or by the committee.
Probably would have helped if he stayed and mentioned that. So restate that. Tell me that again.
So the General Services Committee will be meeting prior to the caucus on Monday. On their agenda is Resolution 77, 7224R, and then also this resolution for introduction 128, 112, 24R. The 128, 112, 24R has a shorter timeline for completion, so the idea was to have the General Services Committee discuss it.
Okay, that's, Mr. Iceland, there's nothing in our rules that preclude us from having discussion about an item prior to its introduction?
Yeah, the important thing in our code is that the council does a review, and we've been doing that review through the committee process. So technically, it isn't even the endorsement of the resolution that counts, just the fact that the committee will be meeting to deliberate on the appropriateness of a street renaming.
And we have done that in the past as well. Not in a while, but I think at least during the last council, we did that a few times.
That said, I know we don't intend to make a have of this, so please, if people can, get their street renaming applications as soon as possible, because it can, while this time we were able to accommodate it, it was very close, because the code does say we need to have that review. So, and I know all these have complicated events with lots of people who need to come to it, so we appreciate the early notice.
Thank you. Okay, so they'll review that, and pending their discussion, we'll do something with it there at Monday's meeting. Next, Mr. Anani's Resolution 129, 112, 24 hours, resolution of the council declaring its intent to act as lead agency for the seeker for ordinance 2791, 24. There'll be referral to planning. Okay, the next, also by Mr. Nani, Resolution 130, 112, 24 hours, resolution of the council expressing concern regarding the reduction of Amtrak service to New York City. We'll be voting on that night. I guess if members want to be sponsors, they can just reach out to staff to let them know for that. That's 130, 112, 24. And next, on to resolutions held by Mr. Robinson. It's Resolution 77, 72, 24 hours, resolution of council honoring the life and legacy of Gail Elliott and renaming the portion Northern. That'll be taken up the General Services meeting also, like Mr. Jimenez just mentioned, on the 18th, and pending the outcome of that, we'll be moving forward with that. The next, by Ms. Frederick, Resolution 108, 101, 24R, it's a resolution of the Common Council reestablishing locally trusted base proportions of homestead, non-homestead. That'll be discussed in finance, and pending the outcome, we'll be moving forward with that resolution. And then lastly, by Ms. Frederick, Resolution 123, 111, 24R, it's the budget intent memo, again, depending on the discussion that's going to occur in the Finance Committee this evening. Pending that outcome, we may be moving forward with that. So that's it for the agenda. Mr. Hoy?
Yeah, do you know what the percentage is for Resolution 108, 101, 24? With the homestead, non-homestead?
So the resolution is we're receiving it, it's supposed to be 55.513% for the homestead, 44.487 for the non-homestead.
And who comes up with that number? I think we're putting unfair burden on homeowners, and I brought this up before, and
So, these, and Gideon can probably speak to this more and in better detail during the Finance Committee meeting. These numbers are derived, well, we're given a range of options by the state, I believe, and we're allowed to adjust it. Keep it at 100%, 90%, 80%, and it provides a list of different percentages that we can use to adjust the base proportions. We typically skew it much more towards benefiting the homestead class rather than benefiting the non-homestead class, and I believe we did that again this year. There's a whole spreadsheet and calculations which I believe was provided to the council, provided it to staff, that demonstrates how the numbers are derived, but it's a formula laid out by the state, and we only have limited options as to how far we can deviate from it, because I think the homestead class actually makes up, in reality, 60-some%, and the non-homestead class is 40-some%. So, we do adjust it as
okay. I think
Can
we
we-
are, though, putting an unfair burden on homeowners. I mean, we just had the reassessment this year. I mean, I think everybody on this council heard from people, upset about the reassessment, and now we're putting more,
Well,
the homestead has to cover more.
we're actually putting less burden on the homestead than the numbers would purely dictate by doing these adjusted base proportions. We're shifting more of the burden with this legislation, as we do every year, away from homestead onto non-homestead.
Yeah, when I started here, it was 50, it was actually, homestead got a bigger discount than non-homestead, 7 years ago. So now it's kind of swinging the other way. I'd rather see it 50-50, but, I don't understand.
Well, I don't
Maybe at a
think,
future meeting, somebody could explain to us.
I think the state, and again, Gideon can probably explain this better during the Finance Committee meeting immediately to follow, the state limits us in how far we can move the needle, and again, we have moved the needle this year, as we do most years, almost as far as the state allows us to.
Okay, thank you.
And we have our budget director here. We'll have him speak to it at the top of
Sure.
finance.
I'll hang out.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Mr. Hoey, seeing that we're through the agenda, motion to adjourn the caucus? Oh, okay. All in favor? Aye. All of, yeah, there's too few of us.
Okay, we're going to take a 2-minute recess to transition, go into the Finance Committee meeting. We're going to start with a quick explanation on homestead, non-homestead, and then we're going into public comment for this evening. We do want to hear from UTA that has been so patiently waiting. Very important to hear from them as well this evening. And again, we'll start in 2 minutes. Okay, are we recording? Thank you. So, welcome to the Wednesday, November 13th meeting of the Finance Committee of the Common Council to discuss the proposed fiscal year 2025 budget. This evening we are joined by committee members Ballerin, Keegan, Farrell, and myself. We are also joined by other council members, Councilmember Zamer, Councilmember Hoey, President Pro Tem Kelly Kimbrough, and our Council President Corey Ellis. Also supporting us this evening, we have our Budget Director, Gideon Grande, our City Clerk, Shaniqua Jackson, our Legislative Director, Brian Jimenez, our Junior Policy Analyst, Alyssa Kamara, and our Research Counsel, Jake Eastland. This evening, we're going to discuss remaining items for the fiscal year 2025 budget and discuss the budget intent memo as well. The goal of this meeting is to get through all necessary budget items so that we can vote on the budget this upcoming Monday, November 18th. As requested via caucus that we just concluded, we do have a question on homestead, non-homestead rates. And so due to the fact that we have council members that are not on finance that will be leaving shortly, we're going to quickly start with that with our budget director, and then we're going to go into public comment and the remaining budget items. So with that, I will hand it over to our budget director.
Yes, budget director for the city, Gideon Grande. So since 1998, the city has continued to use a two-property class levying procedure that is allowed under 1903 of the real property tax law. The goal of that law was to eventually transition to a single rate. The city has continued to extend its powers to assess two different classes of property every 5 years, extending that authorization. As Council Williams sort of spoke earlier, if the city went to a single rate, the homestead class would be assessed 64.7% of the levy, which is approximately $40.8 million. However, the adjusted base proportion procedure allows for the city to transition from what the adjusted base proportions were in 1998 and work towards full equalization over time. So for the 2025 fiscal year, the city has selected to apportion 55.5% of the levy to the homestead class, which is about $35.0 million. That's actually a reduction of $100,000 to the homestead class over the prior year. I believe I talked about it in my presentation at the beginning of the budget process that, despite individual property tax payers, their tax liabilities going up or down, the homestead class will be paying less taxes in 2025 than they did in 2024.
Thank you. And in front of us, we have the table that shows the 10 options ranging from 0 to 100. So, and one of the questions in caucus was around, maybe years ago we had a 50-50% split. Can you just confirm that the lowest possible option we had would have been 54% to homestead and 45% to non-homestead?
Yeah, the lowest option would have been about 54.5%. Yeah, over time, the goal here is to move to equalization. That's why you're seeing this move towards equalization of the actual values of the property. That's what the formula is designed to do.
And my final question before I open to other council members is why did we go with 10% versus 0%, which would have less towards homestead?
Yeah, so obviously, this is a zero-sum game, and whatever relief you provide to the residential side of the ledger has to then be borne by the commercial side. It was felt that, a 7.5% increase on businesses who are already facing a difficult time was just going to be too high. Also, if you look at this from sort of a longer range perspective, last year, the homestead class did see an increase in the apportionment, and so giving a reduction this year seemed in line. And if you take an even longer term view, over the past 5 years, selecting this option would bring both property classes to about a 1.3% average annual increase over the last 5 years.
Thank you. Questions from other council members? Councilmember Hoey.
Yeah, thank you. where I'm getting confused, can you explain why, about the equalization, I guess? So it sounds like they're saying that the businesses in the city, the property values there doesn't add up to all the, the single family, well, the homes, or the homestead. Can you explain how the state comes up with that formula, or?
Well, that's not a formula. That's based on the actual assessments. So, 65% of the property value in the city is residential. That's not an equalization, that's not a formula, that's a fact. And we're only assessing them 55% of the levy. So that sort of is what it is.
Well, and my last question, I guess, and because to me it's hard to comprehend, but if 60% of our property in the city is non-taxable, does that play into this?
No.
So that's why we're being hit, because 60% of the property in the city of Albany don't pay taxes, they're nonprofit, government buildings, so they're putting the burden, it sounds like, on the homeowners.
Well, I mean, yes, that's true. About 2/3 of the property in the city is exempt. And, the state, we're working, as we've requested with the state, that'll sort of be on the next item, to increase those sort of payments in lieu of taxes to the city. Currently receive about $30 million from the state between the Empire State Plaza payment and the Capital City funding. We're looking to increase those. And, I mean, while these two issues are connected, they're a little bit separate in that at this point in time, we have to apportion the levy to our taxable property. And while we would all like things to be different as far as having a larger taxable base, there's not much that we can actively do about that with the state being, owning 40% of the property in the city.
Thank you. It is mind-boggling, but I appreciate the way you explained it. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from council members? Okay, at this time, I'm going to ask Gideon if you can just step aside. We're going to go into our public comment and then to our finance committee meeting. And I do want to just emphasize that I know that council members had to leave, so I wanted to put this first just to make sure we were comfortable on the tax levy before the proposed vote on Monday. So we have two public comment this evening. Our first public comment is Mayor Sharma. And Mayor, if you can join us up at the front, you will have 5 minutes to speak. Please just state your name and address for the record. Again, greatly appreciate your patience this evening. Very important topic that we have on the docket, so thank you for joining us.
Hello? Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mihir. I live at 2 Sprague Place. You all know why I'm here to speak today. Forgive me if I'm a little all over the place. I have a lot less time and a lot to go over. But I want to first start by saying that I really appreciate the labor that went into doing the study. It's a hard lift. It's not a job that I envy. In my position, I empathize a lot. I also get cursed out by landlords, as you can imagine. So I understand that that was a really huge undertaking that the city went through. I also don't think that, based on the concerns that we have, that this data is not of value. I think it's better now that we have this information to work off for the future. So I want to start out by making that really clear. But I do also want to note that I am a little bit baffled as to why we are here, because to me, I think the city did an incredible job in taking what they were given with a low budget to do all of this work. They've done that work, they've put out the report, and now I think we really need to focus on what we can do with that report and where we want to move in the future. And I'm not here to go back and forth on minute points about the study. I want to talk about some broad concerns. I think I can appreciate the value that went into this and also understand that that work doesn't mean that it's unscrutable, right? Because I do think numbers really do matter and the math really matters here. So the first part that I want to start off by talking about is ROPs, residential occupancy permits. I think that that does matter a lot to the definition of rentable in terms of the study. Again, if we're thinking about how we're defining a vacancy and an eligible vacancy, rentable and eligible. That is what we need to follow. I would not consider a unit with no ROP or one that's been deemed unsafe, unfit to live in a rentable unit, right? I wouldn't count that as a reason to include it in the study. And I also want to note that we did take a look in going through this data just to find out if ROPs would really have a big impact on this study, right? We found about almost 200, 187 to be exact, units without ROPs that reported vacancies. We did also take a look at the units that had reported 0 vacancies, and we found about 150 that did not. Of course, this data I don't think is inscrutable because it was what we could do with about 48 hours after we had this report come out, just to do a quick check to see if this really does make a difference. And I think it does. I also want to point out a few examples of why this really does matter in units and buildings that did note a vacancy. So 51 Elm Street, for example, had no ROP. The final notice for not having an ROP was February 22nd of this year. That landlord is in prosecution. They reported 5 out of 10 vacant units in their building, half. Apartment number 7 was shut down as unsafe, unfit because they didn't have power, and this violation remains open as of October 28th when this report came out. 493 State Street, 7 out of 9 were vacant. They haven't had an ROP since 2020, an unsafe, unfit since January 2024. 115 Phillips Street, 11 out of 12 units were reported vacant. They have no ROPs. That landlord is in prosecution. 55 South Lake, 12 out of 48. They've only ever had ROPs for 4 units in over 6 years. I think that is really important to note here. I also do want to mention that Kingston did do their study again. We talked a lot about that. I want to note that their first study was done externally. It had a 6.7% vacancy rate. They did their second study internally. That was part of the reason why at first we thought that an internal study would be beneficial to the city, because they really utilized the resources that they had in that internal study. Maybe that's a matter of the allocation. I don't really want to talk about or speculate why, but they were able to utilize code inspectors and the information that they have to go in and actually physically verify that data. That is the difference in those 2 studies. So that I think really matters. I would also like to note that, yes, their study, like every other study that has been done that's under 5%, has faced a lawsuit. As of right now, though, the New York Appellate Court said that their study is good. They've affirmed that. They've denied them the chance to re-argue their arguments, but they did offer that the Hudson Valley property owners could, if they wanted to, still appeal to the Supreme Court, as is their right to do. But right now, those tenants' rents that are eligible are frozen. They have not been getting rent increases. That is still impactful. I do agree that it's an imperfect process, but it's what we have right now, and I think it's about what this body has the power to accomplish right now, right? So I don't think it's about who did the study, but how, the methodology, and making sure that, we're doing it the right way, we're actually verifying these reports, we're really considering, if we should consider a unit that has no power as rentable and eligible. I would consider that to be under construction. I would also like to note that I think asking for an external study as opposed to internal, if anything, means that we don't have to go through this again as a city, that the city department does not need to spend that labor and those resources redoing this again, that we do it outsourced. And I would like to note that we talked about the Sienna polling, how that wasn't available this year. That's understandable. I'm sure they had their hands full this year, right? But next year is not a federal election year, so things are materially different, and they probably would be available. And we've put out RFPs before that haven't been answered, but those were significantly less than any outsourced study was able to do it on, right? That $75,000 is not enough. In talking with other entities that have conducted the study, they said about $100,000 would be doable, but just about, right? So that's why we're asking for 125,000, because we've been speaking with these entities to make sure that that's really an appropriate amount, and that's something that they can conduct a study on. I think that the city talked about some of the financial burdens that they faced with, dealing with this lower budget, and that's going to alleviate it. So I think that there really is a market, like a very marked difference in what we can do, and the results that we have now. Apologies, I also don't have the time in front of me, so I don't know if that's time.
My apologies. We have reached time. What I would love to do, though, if you can wrap up, I actually would like, since this is a big topic, for you to stay for questioning, but I do want to have the other public comment speak first, because they've also been patiently waiting this evening. So if you can stick for questioning by council members, that would be great. So if you just want to wrap up at this point, that would be awesome.
Sure. Just very quickly, I do think as a college student, a recently graduated college student, as of like last spring, that most college student leases are ending in May and beginning in early or mid-August. All of the leases I've had as a student downtown have worked that way. Everyone I know who rents who's a student right now, it works that way. And I think we need to be real about that. We need to be also real that most of the vacancies that were reported were also in some of the densest areas that we have ETPA eligible properties, like Pine Hills, like Center Square, where a lot of students live. A lot of my friends who are still college students live there. All of my college apartments have been in those areas. They have not been in newer buildings. I couldn't afford it. A lot of students can't, you know? So I really would like to spend the time talking about the facts that we do have, instead of making these unsubstantiated claims or guesstimates about which populations live where, or guesstimate about why there is a housing crisis. I would just like to end by saying no other study has included reasons why this is too small of an issue or a regional issue, or minimizing the issue within the report itself. I think that's something to be absolutely noting. And I just want you guys to think about the people, the tenants who have called you, who have come here to testify, the Danker tenants who would 100% be covered by this, who you've asked, what can we do to support you? This is what you can do to support you. And do you want to tell them, when they call you asking what happened about rent stabilization, to say, we didn't think it was worth 0.05% of this budget to give it another go? Or do you want to say that we at least tried? We did as much as we could, and we'll see what those results are next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is Daniel Pratt.
Good evening, everybody. It's Dan Platt, 187 Elk Street. Honorable members of this committee and beyond, I'm Dan Platt, a lifelong resident of Albany for my 36 years. I've come before you as a current candidate of the PEGOB, or Channel Albany of Public Access Board, so I'm under consideration as a candidate there, so I'm come to speak to you about that, as well as kind of make a pitch for Channel Albany support as well. So my involvement in this process is a continuation of my engagement with building community media these past 8 years, a response, personally, to the current endemic state of local journalism, which drives home the importance of the need for a robust platform for grassroots content creation and distribution. As a platform, the station can expand its use as an outlet of creativity, passion, and innovation, which means, or end means, to provide a right to access to mass media. Since 2018, I produced content for and managed the low-power community radio station, WCALP on Grand Street. Now I'm looking to use my experience there to engage and improve the reach and effectiveness of Channel Albany, which I passed over back in 2018 myself. I wouldn't have bothered applying for this board position if not for the growing interest from this council with the increases in the annual budget over previous past underfunding. But there is much more needed if the station is to grow beyond the 4 active programs that I could see, and the sharing of a weekly time with Schenectady's public access. So as a matter of saving money and using the current amount effectively, changes are needed amongst, in the opinion of myself and others who are actively using it, as well as on the outside. This means getting the management of the station back in Albany is a primary priority when opportunity knocks. The second ask I make is to increase the support and annual budget in order to employ a full station director and a part-time role for community outreach. So the current capacities of the station are at a bare minimum because the staffing is sort of at a minimum. And that also leads to a minimum programming and a minimum of public goods. Plus, as far as increasing the annual budget, whatever is needed for outreach, which would supersede the basics of, wouldn't supersede the basics of printing cards, handouts, posters, which more or less would just join the city's other service outreach, just to go in parallel with it, which of course is a nominal amount. So, and a further long-term goal of myself is to fund citizen journalism in the form of public information district, which is a new model of thinking about the public's right as citizens to reliable and comprehensive journalism to make informed decisions about their lives and our politics. As we all know, it's over and over conversation. So, back to my candidacy. If selected for the board position, I will commit to doing what is possible independent of these other factors, such as the current or the budget that it is. Developing the station by expanding the content therein. Partnering with any and all possible civil service, society orgs, artists, personal producers, and institutions. Almost everyone is producing something and deserves to reach the widest audience possible. And conversely, they will share knowledge of and use Channel Albany. So, to put in practical terms, full canvas outreach, I will door knock, I will phone bank to collect interest from people. And that's like a basic level of activity I would put into the board. So I personally found it easier to fill a weekly schedule than it may look, especially when paired with a serious outreach campaign and connecting with the enterprising and curious, as well as those who know that living in an information desert is about as bad as living in a food desert. So if appointed, I would treat this as any public position I would ever have and that I would ever commit to holding, to hold no biases, to ensure that it's a platform that is about access to everyone and all voices. That's what I expect of all city services, public services. It's what I want, and as do all of us. So otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Platt, for your comments, and thank you for your interest in serving. Okay, so we are going to jump right into our budget. I do want to let Mayor come back up and join us. If there's any questions for Mayor, as the representative of UTA, we have heard today already from our Neighborhood Services Division. Just checking, Gideon, are there, just check in on topics, what specific items are you going to cover tonight?
We already did the apportionment. We can talk about the tax levy limit override and the bonds, at least the recreation one. I guess I can make some comments about the others, but.
Okay, if we can, you can stay there, Mayor. If you can come up right here to Councilmember Hyde Clark's desk.
Oh, sorry.
For a mic, and we'll see if there's any questions, and then we'll go into our budget director items as well. Perfect, right there, and then you could just use that mic right there. Okay, so just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Platt, who's also waiting, but let's go back to comments from UTA. Do we have any questions based on Mayor's comments this evening? Councilmember Farrell.
Thank you so much for coming in and also for the analysis of the report. We definitely appreciate the input and obviously the work of United Tenants. So I think what we're trying to kind of wrap our arms around is exactly what would be different. And that's one of the things that is, at least for me, not clear. So there's some things like when we talk about the ROP, one of the pushbacks with that was that they said that the calculations that UT had miscounted multiple properties with ROPs and did not remove any properties without ROPs that reported 0 vacancies. Can you respond to that at all?
Sure.
it feels funny being on this side, but yeah, so a couple of things. I think things that would be substantially different this time around is if there was an external study done, the ability of having like accurate phone banking services is one of them. Another is ROPs, like you said, and actually considering them into that. When we did the brief analysis around the vacancies that were reported that did not have ROPs, we looked at those firstly to just determine if there was any correlation between places that had really high reportings of vacancies and no ROPs, to see if there's a linkage there that maybe not having an ROP might have something to say about the condition of the unit and its rentability. And we found that there was a really strong correlation. And that's where we made that calculation based off of. We did, like I said, go back and take a look at those that did report zero vacancies, and there were about 150 or so units that had no ROPs in that data as well.
So, I mean, I guess that that's just something it would be helpful to look at the actual data that you're feeding, like giving back, because it seems like there's a discrepancy of data analysis here, and that is not something that we're going to be able to solve tonight. And I will say, he didn't say, like, the phone banking was part of what made it take longer. I don't know that there would be a difference. I don't know that it was staff hours. That was why they wanted to utilize a phone banking service, because they didn't want to utilize staff hours. So I don't think who phone banks. I don't know how that would, how would phone banking impact the study?
Sure. That's simply to respond to the comment that like nothing would be different this time around, but I do think that phone banking or having an actual service to do that phone banking would simply just mean a higher level of scrutiny and also, you know, less time spent doing the actual study itself.
What makes you say that?
Just more capacity to do follow-up calls and continue doing those follow-up calls for those that may not have been reporting and still haven't answered. You know, like you said, this was taking up staff time and hours, and that also contributed to elongating the study. If, you know, we had an outsourced entity that could do the phone banking while data verification is taking place, while in-person verification is taking place, I think that would really make a difference in where these resources are being put. I'm not an expert in how to run a vacancy study, but I do think that would make a substantial difference in being able to contribute more time towards those in-person verifications for places like those ROPs that reported places without ROPs that reported really high vacancy rates, being able to dedicate more time towards verifying those as opposed to staff hours spent following up on folks.
That, I guess I appreciate your answer, but I don't actually see how that would impact the study.
I think it would just be a matter of the timeline itself and where actual human resources are being put into increasing the capacity to make those verifications by outsourcing that phone banking.
So you think there would be a higher response rate if we outsourced the phone banking specifically?
I don't think I can say for sure, but I could imagine there could be, based on the amount of people hours to do follow-ups.
Okay. I don't know that I agree with that, but I appreciate your response with it. My other question is the timing. So, and I will say, and I've said many times, I'm on my third kid in college, and I've paid for, I don't know anybody, and I know a lot of people that have paid for kids in college. I don't know anyone that has not had a 12-month lease paying for their kids off campus. The kid might not move in right away, but you have to pay for the summer. Like I hate it. I wish it was not true. It is terrible, it sucks, but it is what it is, and it is always a 12-month lease. I've never ever heard of anyone having less than a 12-month lease for a college student.
I'd be happy to send you a copy of my previous leases or other people's previous leases.
But just to follow up with that, the vast majority of the responses, like 77%, were in before the college students. So the other thing that I don't understand is why the length of time changes the validity of this report. Because the majority, 77, I mean, more responses than everywhere else except for Newburgh were in May, like every other place that has done a study. So I don't understand what would be different either. And that's something it just, in the response, was not articulated well for me, that I don't fully understand what more time would do that's different. I think the ROP, it would be helpful to actually look at the data and compare the two, because I think that could be a very compelling response, but the pushback with it, like I just think that's a data issue that we really actually have to look at. I don't think a phone banking thing makes a difference. Like I just don't see that as relevant. But I would like to hear about the length of time and exactly what would be different with that. Because we had, I think, a 77 response, was it 77? It's right in here, but 77% response rate in May. And that, again, is more than Austin, Kingston, Poughkeepsie, and Rochester through their entire process. So I don't, if you could just articulate what would have been different with that.
Sure. So if I may, there were just a lot of points there. Around the student leases, a lot of them do end in May, begin late August. That's how it's worked when I've done student rentals as a student in Albany. And Albany Student Rentals LLC, I think, is the name of the group that has a lot of properties in Pine Hills. This is very standard practice around there. But if we want to take a look at some of those practices, we could certainly do that, but I don't have the exact numbers of that. And yeah, not also the main contribution.
So I guess aside from that, because that is something that I just, even if that is entirely accurate and Albany is an anomaly for everywhere else, and the landlords here are kinder to college students and don't make you rent a 12-month lease, which I think is awesome. I still don't understand. We had a 77% response rate in May. So what would be, like, in other words, the bulk of our data we got in May. So what exactly would the time, other than, I also agree, it would be lovely to have a lot more time with this, because I do think that this is difficult to do for all of us, all sides to do last minute. Like, this is hard. And I do have concerns with that. But specifically in terms of, like, is it just the college student that you think would be different? And how would 77% of the responses be different with more or less time? Like, so we have 77%. So the difference between that, and so it's like a 5% difference. I guess, what in that 5% would have, like, do you think it would have been significantly more? I don't see what the difference is.
Yep. So I think that, the phone banking, the college students, all of that is a smaller piece to the main point, that is verification, in-person verification of the reporting. It is landlord self-reporting. And I want to make it really clear that, yes, my job is to organize tenants for better conditions, so we're pushing for something like this. Landlords pushing a lot harder, a lot more money to do the opposite, right? We know that there have been mailings out to landlords. There's that stock photo of the guy slitting his throat and saying, this is what you're doing if you don't respond to this vacancy study. We know the rhetoric that property owners have had around this, and so do we really want to take all of that at face value, or do we want to do the due diligence of verifying that information? And I think that means if we're prolonging the study and there are vacancies that are reported while students and state workers who are more transient communities are in the city, it's a lot easier to verify if those folks are still there, right, than to try and retroactively verify later in July a vacancy that was reported in April or May. I think that, again, with less time being devoted to things like following up, we could be doing actual verification. I think that
And I'm sorry but tonight they said that the main reason why it took so long is because they were verifying. Because
Sure,
they were
so what-
taking time to do verification. So I guess that's, for
Can
me,
I
that's the
clarify one point
thing,
real
that
quick?
if they're taking more time to do verification, to do the due diligence, it doesn't, to me, more time would actually be, like, for the example of the substantial renovation piece, taking the time to actually go through that. And the reason why they chose to include that is because the directive from the state agency, which created, like, we have to use that. That is something that our independent contractor would have to use. Like, you have to use, when a state agency gives guidance, you have to use that. We would not have an option to not use that guidance. So
I think that, from my understanding, that was a recommendation from DHCR, but not a necessity. I think, like we said, with the verifications that did take place, those verifications were done to verify if a unit was exempt as claimed by a landlord. So that's why there was so much time digging in the basements, and those claims were about substantially rehabbed buildings, right? To verify if this was substantially rehabbed or not. And I think that is part of the concern, is that there was so much time spent on verifying those very few, actual units that were exempted in the end versus units that don't have ROPs, that are not habitable buildings. I think that is something that we should have been spending time verifying instead of, this recommendation from DHCR, which I understand is the state agency doing it, but at the end of the day, it's not something that this city had to do.
So I'm sorry, I will stop talking soon, but, so your frustration with the time period is that it's not necessarily the time period, but that the time spent on verifications was not in the places that you would have liked to see them, which would be on the ROPs.
I think it's both the length of time and like what we were actually spending time verifying. Verifying if a place has an ROP or not is a very quick thing that we were able to do within a few hours. Trying to dig through the records of if a building has been renovated for months takes a lot longer, right?
Right, but they did have a compelling argument that, so an ROP is not, it's not necessary in the legislation. They had a very good response to
And so is
not just
exempting the
discounting.
substantially renovated buildings are also not spelled out explicitly in the law.
No,
I realize that this law is very vaguely written, but I think it's interesting
Agreed.
that we are choosing where to verify and where
But
not to, based on their guidance.
So my understanding was not that they were verifying. Did anybody else get the idea? I thought that what they were saying tonight is they were spending a lot of time verifying everything. That it wasn't just that the substantially renovated, they were actually spending a lot of time verifying everything.
Verifying what else?
Like when a building was built?
Yeah,
when they said that they were not eligible, like the tables they showed.
Yeah.
Sure, so we can find out when a building has been built, but we're not finding out if it has an active ROP.
They also addressed the ROPs in the
They
study.
did that, yeah.
Right, so I want to also note that Albany is the only city that has not gone based off of their residential rental dwellings, registry. Every other city did that. Austining does not have one, so they did not, obviously. But we have a system to ensure that a unit is habitable. We have a way of demarking that as a city. So I think.
So are you saying that vacant buildings were considered in this?
I know that there are a lot of, yes, some of them are vacant, pretty.
In other words,
strong.
on the vacant building registry, because you said that we didn't consider the vacant building registry as part of our study?
Units that are in the rental dwelling registry, for which the study states there's about 40 that landlords over-reported that aren't in there, but there was also no verification again into if it had an active ROP.
They started, They,
Just
they
to-
started with that, and it's addressed in the report, Mira, that they had the opportunity to just look at ROPs or buildings that were renting without an ROP, and they chose to look at all of the properties, including those buildings that were renting units without an ROP. They went through several different methodologies to verify the data and the differentiation between those landlords that were renting with an ROP and renting without an ROP, and they calculated the difference would have been less than 0.1%.
That was specifically for the rental dwelling registry, which, you know, that's the 40 that they're saying that they shifted. That doesn't match up with the 200 units of reported vacancies that had no ROP, some of which I mentioned here. We're reporting over half of a vacancy or a majority of a building being vacant, and some of those buildings don't have power right now. I want to stress that I think that's really absurd that we're counting that, right? I think that's something we can agree on, hopefully. But you know, that also doesn't include the additional 150, so around 350 total units that reported no vacancies and didn't have an ROP. 150 that didn't report vacancies, 187 that did.
Thank you, and thank you for bearing with our questions, because we are really coming from an angle of trying to understand, right, what is the best step forward for us. So I'm going to go to Councilmember Ballerin next.
Thank you. So I think one change I'd like to see if, when and if we redo the study is that we have a standard of habitability. So an apartment needs to be habitable to be able to count it as a vacant unit. I don't think we had that. And what I heard was that the state doesn't say we can't. We can't have, the state doesn't say that we can't. Look, this is a very vague state policy, which really has put a lot of municipalities in a lot of sticky situations. But based on what, and I asked the question, the state doesn't prohibit us from having a requirement that the apartment must be habitable to count towards a vacancy. So I think that's one clear indication that if we do this study, that should be something that is looked at, that only habitable apartments are able to be considered vacant towards the vacancy study. You know, so that's one change I would like to see in the future. A lot of time was focused on verifying the claims of exemptions. And 71% of those exemptions were found not to be proven. I would say we moved forward, we would put that on the landlord. The state doesn't require for us to verify it. It's on the landlord. Now, that doesn't mean that the ones we've already verified as exempt shouldn't stay exempt. We've already done the let work. They should stay exempt. We did right. But going forward with a new study, it should be put on the landlords. I also think, and this is a state issue, I think the state needs to increase the fine from $500 to $50,000, because landlords, investors, it's all risk management. And what is the risk for the return? If there's a $500 risk of a fine, but the return is tens and thousands of dollars of annual revenue, the risk is very low. So there's not much teeth to holding landlords accountable. But that's a state issue. That's something we do have limited authority on, but we can advocate for. I guess my question is more on, did other cities that have gone through this process, now we heard a lot about the lawsuits, what other cities are in the process of actually having this get close to implementation or implemented at this time?
So I know that Kingston is, in the process of affirming their opt-in, and those tenants' rents, like I said, are frozen right now, so they've not seen an increase since that initial opt-in, which I think does really make a huge difference in these folks' lives. And I know that other cities like Rochester, Ithaca are gearing up to do their own studies or push for doing their own studies. We talked about the Osmean and Newburgh studies already. Every city that opts in or is likely to face a lawsuit, right? Because it's in their best interest to at least try and give it a go to shoot it down. But I think it's in our best interest to at least try one more time with a clear methodology, a clear timeline that we at least adhere to if we're sticking to a timeline, and the due diligence of doing in-person verification. Again, there's no information on what kind of in-person verification occurred, if any did happen at all. We know that other cities have done in-person verification, like I said, Kingston, and they were able to, verify some of those vacancies and have that 1.57% vacancy rate the second time around.
Can I have a follow-up question? Sure. Can I have a follow-up question?
Yes.
Thank you. So you mentioned Kingston has, even though they're still in the mix of a lawsuit, their residents have this protection currently, correct? So they do currently have this protection, even though they're still in the mix of a lawsuit. Their residents have the protection, correct?
So right now their rents are frozen. They can legally not get a rent increase because this is still in the process of being decided. Again, it has been affirmed twice in the courts. And the point that they're really pushing on right now is simply if they can do the rent reduction that the Rent Guidelines Board suggested doing, a reduction of 15% for eligible tenants. And that's the pushback that they're facing right now. That rent reduction hasn't gone into effect, but until then, rents are frozen.
Okay. And then
from my understanding.
My second follow-up question is, you said Kingston was able to do a more of an in-person verification of the data that was given to them by the landlords. Can you please share with us a little bit of what Kingston did to be able to do that more accurately?
Yep, so the second Kingston study, they worked with their local code enforcement because they do have a means of, requiring inspections for apartments, at least coming to verify. As we can see, there's probably a lot of ROP renewal inspections that need to occur regardless. And so that's how they were able to go in and verify units for vacancies.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will go to Councilmember Anani.
Yeah, thank you, and apologize for being tardy. And I wish I was here when the Community Development Agency was here, and we're good to talk about the study. But I think right now, at this hour, what it comes down to is, I don't think it's about United Tenants or the Community Development Agency study. I think it's really up to council members to really reflect, like, do we want this study to be redone or not? And I think that's really what it comes down to. I have a few questions that I was going to ask the Community Development Agency, but I just want council members, if council members want to answer it, or if anyone wants to answer it.
Can we, not to interrupt, can we focus on questions for, is it Mira or Mira?
Meher.
Meher, thank you. Yeah. Just so that she doesn't have to continue sitting in that seat. And then we'll get into the larger discussion with council members on what we're going to do.
Thank you so much. Why do you think they spend so much time validating exemptions rather than validating vacancy response?
So to me, it seems clear that they asked DHCR, the department, if they would recommend doing that. Otherwise, historically, I think it's important to remember that DHCR, that State Department, would take on that labor. So I do think it's a little bit in their best interest to have the city do that work, which I think is an unfair burden to our city workers for having to have done that when no other city needed to do that, right? But I think that is a concern because, again, that's a recommendation. That's not an imperative that they need to do. Whereas I think putting that labor, like you said, towards actually investigating vacancies, as other cities have been doing, is really where labor and time should be put into. And again, one of the only ways to do that is really to do either in-person verification, check online to see if the apartment was even listed as rented or rentable. I think there's a lot that, methodologically could be different about the study, and the study does note is different from other cities that have done it. There's unclear guidance from the state all around, but I think that if there are questions in our minds about the data, how it was collected, how it was verified, why not make sure that we are sound in our decision making? It's 0.05% of this really huge budget. I know that, your jobs isn't just to allocate huge sums of money every day, but I think it's a real small drop in the bucket to have that added assurance.
I like to reclaim my time. Give me a second. I like to reclaim my time. And the next question, what do you believe that preemptively for the Community Development Agency preemptively did the exemption research, a process typically that's done after we opt out as a city? Why did they do that exemption research? What do you believe? Why they did the research?
So, like I said, it seems to be that is the recommendation that they got from DHCR, and that's what they spent time doing. Again, like same as before, I think that time could have been spent doing more in-person validation.
Gotcha. And the next question is, why the Community Development Agency didn't consider ROPs and a vacancy rate?
I really don't have an answer for that because I'm not sure what the reasoning for that was. As someone who wasn't in that department, not doing that study, I can't really imagine why they wouldn't consider that. Again, just on the basis of so many other studies being challenged, I think it makes sense to be rigorous in what is actually counted. And again, I don't think an apartment with an unsafe unfit notice, if tenant physically is not allowed to enter that apartment again, I don't consider that an organic vacancy. And I don't think us you as a body, should be considering that too.
And then also, when we were doing the vacancy study, the Community Development Agency shared with the council and other groups that, they will consult anyone local in creating a study structure. There was a letter that they sent out through the timeline that was used, the methodology they created, and there was supposed to be a planning group for the study, but there was no follow-up on that idea. Why do you think they did that?
So again, I don't want to spend too much time speculating on why. I just simply know that wasn't the case. There was some initial intent or outreach. This wasn't with me directly, but one of my colleagues, to have some sort of local involvement and planning in the methodology, especially as folks who have worked closely with other cities that have been opting in, noticing issues with those studies and reasons why those studies had holes poked in them from landlords before. We had a real breadth of knowledge going into this on what would make it a really solid, fair study, and the communication from the department was not there with local groups, and that's really all I know regarding that. And I really do wish that, if anything, we could have a conversation as all of us about this, because I don't want to, I'm not here to point blames at any city workers or department, but, try and find a path forward here that would actually work for us, work for tenants.
Yeah, and I know some of these questions, again, speculations, and I wish Community Development Agency could have answered this, but I just want council members to actually think about some of these questions and just really try to answer it for yourself when you're making this decisions, right? Another question too that is why didn't they do any investigation with properties with abnormally high vacancy rate? We kind of know we can't have one staffer who has a day job and then also doing a vacancy study on top of it, but that's not there. Why didn't they investigate properties with abnormally high vacancy rate?
So I know there was a note in the report itself that said that there was not as much in-person verification out of fear of seeming biased in any regards. I understand where that's coming from, but I don't think it's a bias to want to investigate really high reported vacancies. That's kind of the point of the study, is to make sure that those are really like accurate results. And if we're just not doing that verification out of fear of potential bias, I think that in it of itself is a bias. You're explicitly not looking further into what otherwise might be kind of screwable data.
Yeah, thank you.
That again is all self-reported, and that's what we're basing this off of.
Correct. And just last final statement, which is, and I said it to all council members, I personally think that because of delays in the timeline, particularly when it comes to the approval funded on the basis that the Department of Community Development Agency could complete the study by May 2024. That timeline was shifted to October 2024, following multiple months of delays, despite the fact that no other study has taken more than 3 months to complete. The department said this is due to scale of the study, but as of June, the study had 80% response rate, and as of August, they had an 82% response rate. And there is data, but no analysis on the data. Additionally, the city had not, as of August 14th, conducted any site visit to validate landlord's self-reported vacancy. Instead, they have only continued to follow up with non-responsive landlords. At this rate, it appears the study was not going to be done, but ultimately it was rushed, personally, I think. And with all those facts that was shared, I strongly believe with the challenges of the city of Albany is going through and the finances, particularly with housing, that it's prudent to conduct an outside sourced to do the vacancy study to ensure accurate data and ensure that a timely report can be issued given numerous delays. And again, I fully support the $125,000 appropriation. I believe should be sufficient. And I know there's some people that say this is only going to impact 10% of our population, but I think that when we have a huge increase in homelessness, particularly not in the lower wards anymore, but coming to the upper wards, Pine Hills, Buckingham Pond, we really need to look at this as not a lower ward issue, but also look at it as a city of Albany issue. Because when homelessness is being created, they no longer staying in the lower wards, but coming up to the Pine Hills and upper wards as well.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we're going to transition. Thank you very much for going through our questions and staying this whole evening. It's about 8:30, so I know that you've been here since the beginning. We are going to, at this point, go to our budget director, who has also been here the whole evening, and go over the additional information that you wanted to share with us this evening before we go into the final amendment deliberations. And just for council members present, this is our last finance committee meeting. I don't know if you all want to stay to 11 or 12 tonight, but if we can try to keep our comments brief as we go through these. If something has already been said, no need to say again, etc. But hopefully we can come to a consensus this evening. Question? Yes.
Just, Councilmember Anani just commented on the vacancy study, so not necessarily asking a question. I'm just
Correct.
Wondering, are we waiting, at what point?
We're going to go back to the vacancy study after we give our budget director, who's been patiently waiting, the floor. Yes,
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. I guess I'll just take some of these in order if there's any further questions. The first item, the waste management plan, I know some additional information had been requested by the committee. With an open competitive bid process going on right now, it's going to be difficult for me to comment more in depth on the plan and the bids that came in. I would say maybe, this could be tabled at this point in time if the committee doesn't feel comfortable enough with the overall waste management plan and probably bring DGS into the Finance Committee or a joint committee with Public Works at a later date.
Thank you. I think that's likely what we'll do, just to make sure, obviously, obviously with the landfill, we'll be losing revenue, but we'll also be expending, and we just want to make sure that there's a best interest in mind to hopefully mitigate the expenses that we'll be incurring. So further conversation on that would be great.
Yeah, and the next two items, the streets and sidewalks, I know those lists have not been prepared by engineering quite yet. They're in the process. They haven't been finalized. You know, I would say traditionally those usually aren't available until December or so, and I believe every year that I've been here, the council has waited until December or January to pass those ordinances once the specific projects have been outlined to the committee.
Agree. We will hold on those.
The final one is the parks playground debt. You know, I provided the committee some information regarding a third-party vendor that the Department of Recreation has engaged to do a review of all its playground equipment and, you know, inform some of these designs going forward as to what's the best equipment choices for both, you know, all inclusivity and ADA compliant equipment as we do these playground upgrade projects.
Councilmember Keegan.
Is there a reason why they selected a vendor that does not specialize in the type of inclusive playgrounds that we requested, development that we requested last year?
I'm not familiar with individual playground vendors. I would have to speak with the Department of Recreation regarding their selection of that particular vendor.
But the vendor that they're using does, I mean, they do municipal development, so they certainly can speak to ADA compliance, but they do not have a single solitary project that they've worked on that meets the spirit and the merit of what we asked for last year. And that does concern me because if you did an RFP asking them to assess ADA compliance in parks that we already had assessed for ADA compliance, they're going to come back and tell you, you don't need to do anything else. And we were asking for really specific types of equipment to be incorporated, and that really requires that you have somebody that's looking at disability inclusion above and beyond the bare minimum of what the ADA does, and this company has no experience doing any of that.
I'll take that back.
It sounds like we might want to hold on this one as well. Any concerns with that hold at this point? Budget Director?
No.
Okay, thank you.
The next item is the local law authorizing the override of the tax cap for fiscal year 2025. This is really sort of just a placeholder just in case that needs to be passed. The budget as proposed, the levy increase would be tax cap compliant on sort of normal terms, but we also have the request to the state that the committee is aware of to put our Empire State Plaza pilot and the Capital City funding all into the pilots from the state for its real property that we sort of discussed earlier that represents about 40% of the entire real property base of the city. If the state acts on that request as requested, it will cause the city to have a technical tax cap overage.
Thank you. And so since this is a placeholder, we do not necessarily need to vote until we reach that point?
No, the tax levy limit override has to be passed prior to the council adopting a budget.
Thank you for the clarification. Councilmember Keegan?
I just want to make sure that I understand this because we've received certain pilots and capital city funding previously, and that has not been included in how we tabulate the revenue. And if we do this going forward, are we going to have to override the tax cap every year? Or because we did it this one year in 2025, any future funds do not impact the tax limit?
It would need to be done every year that the state does not execute the requests the mayor has made as requested. So should the state provide us with the statutory pilot in presumably March as part of the 2025-26 state budget, no, it would never need to be passed again. However, if that were to not happen, the first year in which it happens always needs the override. After that, it would be sort of baked into the base and never needed again.
So it would become part of the commercial and homestead levy? Is that what you're, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I understand how it fits into the pie.
So payments in lieu of taxes are part of the tax cap calculation. The current capital city funding is paid to the city as miscellaneous state aid and is not part of the tax cap calculation. When the current $15 million Empire State Plaza pilot, if you were to add another $15 million to it, would cause us to exceed the tax cap.
Okay. So the current 15 million is already included in how we tabulate our levy. It's the addition of the capital city funding to that pilot. And are they looking to make that pilot permanent? Because I know it's supposed to expire in 2030?
Yeah, I think it's 2031, but yes, it would be to make that permanent and to allow for an inflation factor as well, because obviously it's been 15 million for a decade or so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you, Shay. One quick question. So if we raise the tax levy, that does not affect the percentage of what we're raising taxes on individuals, correct?
No.
Okay.
Correct.
And it doesn't make it so city residents aren't eligible for STAR, correct?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Farrell.
I guess I don't fully understand. I missed in the revenue section that we were changing what our ask. So we're changing our ask to the state, and we're not, that's the part that I guess which has nothing to do with the overall. That's something I should have.
Yes,
know more about.
we would like the current $30 million we receive from the state in the two payments to both be a statutorily permanent pilot.
I see. Okay, so we're looking for a new pilot with like something similar to 19A.
Correct.
Where it's like a long-term thing in.
Hopefully in perpetuity.
All right.
Okay, and then that, therefore, the combination into the pilot would require a change to the tax levy first year, and so hence the need for the override.
Correct.
Okay. Do we have any other questions on this? Okay, and given that we do have to pass this with the budget, is there a motion to pass local law K out of committee? Okay, motion from Councilmember Keegan to pass local K out of committee with a favorable recommendation. Is there a second? Second from Councilmember Ballerin. All those in favor? Aye. Local law K of 2024 passes out of committee with a positive recommendation and will be voted on Monday evening.
Thank you.
Anything further? All set? Thank you very much. It doesn't look like it, no. He's gonna. Okay. All right, so now we are at the point where I want to go into our deliberations, and I do want to just recap what we have already established as part of the Finance Committee, since we broke this into 2 meetings. Okay. So our I urge council members to think of this Looks like we might have another item on the floor. Let's see.
No, I think because we did the apportionment out of order, you just do need to vote that out of committee. I don't think we did that earlier.
Thank you. Referring to, which one? 108? Give me a second. Too many papers.
Resolution 108, 101, 24R.
Okay, so Resolution 108, 101, 24R is a resolution of the Common Council establishing the locally adjusted base proportions of the homestead and non-homestead classes for property tax purposes pursuant to Article 19 of the Real Property Tax Law. Thank you for that reminder. With that, do we have any questions on the homestead, non-homestead legislation? Okay. Looks like we might have a motion. Councilmember Farrell?
I move that we move Resolution 108, 101, 24R out of the committee with a positive recommendation.
Thank you. Motion from Councilmember Farrell, second from Councilmember Keegan to move out of committee with a positive recommendation. All those in favor? Aye. Resolution 108, 101, 24R moves out of committee with a positive recommendation and will also be voted on Monday evening. Okay. Going back to where I was, I just want to remind members that we need to think of all these amendments holistically in our ask. And so you know I will be meeting with our budget director and the administration tomorrow to go over our holistic amendment items and ultimately work with our budget director to find the appropriate counts to move that so that we're not obviously affecting or doing anything further with our tax base. So items we discussed last meeting, we are supportive of pursuing an additional increase for animal control licensing for $8,900. We are also supportive of $9,000 for the city clerk for furnitures and fixtures, and $15,000 for the Violence Prevention Task Force for their outreach, training, and legislation. Oh, $16,000. Yes. We were going to get a little bit more detail on the technology or the contracted services. I know that was provided, so we're going to talk through that this evening, but we were generally supportive of that. And then one, I think there might be something, is there something I'm missing here?
I think that we wanted more information on the fire department training, but we were all basically in favor of it. I think it's something that we could consider on the list and just for due diligence get more information on it. Yep. But I personally would be very comfortable including that on our official tally. And then, you know, I do think due diligence is an important thing. So once we get that, great. But I also think we should just include it.
So let's jump into that. So Albany Fire Department has requested an additional $40,000 for training. I did get further information on that. I should have had our budget director say as well, had a conversation with our budget director. So the information that he had gathered from the increase for trainings includes wanting to purchase more training equipment so that they don't have to outsource to Colony, Bethlehem, surrounding areas for their training. And also just general supplies. So the example given was when they do burns, obviously there's a cost impacted, and if they can do more of that as part of their training, that would also be incorporated in this $40,000. So that's the information that I received from the budget director. We can also ask any more clarifying questions, but I do think I'm generally supportive of this increase as well. Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on that, Chair. My only question is, did we get any numbers from the union? I know they were the ones who came up and asked about it.
Yes, that was a number provided by the fire department, so yes.
Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, so we will also pursue $40,000 increase for Albany Fire Department. We did have a discussion on the Ethics and Workforce Audit, understanding that we have the Ethics and Workforce Committee spearheaded by Councilmember Keegan, and the necessity to have an audit conducted by the City Auditor's Department. to, as we look to calendar year 2025. I did speak to the city auditor, and she did confirm that she does not have the appropriate funding to carry out that audit as included in her budget. So she would be looking for enhanced dollars towards contracted services if we want to complete that audit this year, this upcoming year. So comments, questions on that? Councilmember Keegan, then Councilmember Ballerin.
I think my comments remain the same. I mean, I think that this committee, as well as our colleagues, have to make some really tough decisions with regard to what their priorities are going to be. I don't think that we have the ability to find funding to redo the vacancy study, to do the ethics and workforce audit, and to substantially increase the Community Police Review Board funding as requested. I think, you know, either we're going to, you know, those are the choices and options that we have.
We are going to go to Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you. So, you know, I think, look, we always have to make tough choices, but we also have to realize that we're looking at a less than a $1 million look at a $260+ million budget. And I will hold our budget director to his comments when we questioned him about the $6 million that he put in for cameras, and some of us were hesitant if we were going to make that mark, and we didn't want to have a situation like we've had in the past. And he said we could absorb a $1 or $2 million, you know, in such a large budget. So, you know, if we can absorb $1 or $2 million in such a large budget, I think we can find a few $100,000 to address concerns that are being brought to us by our residents, and, you know, that are good investments in my mind. So, you know, I'm open to continuing the conversation and looking how we can make that happen.
As part of this conversation, I do just want to bring into the fold that the mayor does have line item veto authority as part of this. So when we talk about what we're going to do, that is also something that we need to keep top of mind. Okay, Council Member, Councilmember Farrell from committee, and then Councilmember Nane.
I do think the ethics and workforce audit is an important thing to do. And unfortunately, while we do, hopefully we will get a lot of revenue from a lot of things, that's, unfortunately, we can't just, we have to be fiscally responsible too. So it's not something where we can just pretend there's like, and I'm not saying you are saying there's magic money around, Alfredo. I know that you are a fiscally responsible person, and I'm not saying that at all. You're very fiscally responsible. But I also, having been very involved in this budget for many, many years, we also have a very, like, we have to be fiscally responsible. So from my own perspective, I think it's important to prioritize things. So from my perspective, those pieces that we already agreed with, you know, those, like it's basically $74,000. That to me is stuff that I think is an essential piece that we should move forward with. They're not giant pieces of funding, but they're important to our staff. And then from there, I think the ethics and workforce audit is something, from my perspective, that should be prioritized next. This is something that we have heard for years, a lot of different feedback on workforce culture within the city. We are so lucky to have, I'm so proud of the people that work for the city of Albany, and we just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support the workforce culture. So from my perspective, that is really important to prioritize. And so next, like, just from what, and I'm happy to listen to Councilmember Keegan, because if she's going to be like, no, actually I think something different, I would listen to her because of the work she's doing. But just in terms of the discussions that we've had, that would be my next most important funding piece.
I just also want to note that the auditor's office is doing a housing audit. That is what their audit funds are for this year. So we would essentially be, I mean, I don't know what the parameters of that housing audit is going to be, but that is what her audit funds are being utilized for this year.
Okay. And so we talked about 74K. We also have a placeover of 100,000. When I did talk to the city auditor, I did mention 75 to 100 at that time, and she seemed comfortable. So I think that if we're in that range and we put that in, I think that would be okay. Let's not lose sight of the fact that we do have our city clerk, who also will be speaking to some of that technology software, which is not included in the 74K currently, that I think we are also supportive of, I would venture to guess. So before we go into that conversation, we did have a hand up here, Councilmember Anane.
Yeah. First, I just want to say I am so proud to be part of this council. Like, we have done some great things when it comes to housing, which is really the main issue of the day, right? 2024 right now, people are struggling with housing affordability. A whole host go on, and I think that, whether it was good cause eviction, inclusionary zoning, or some form of right to counsel, we have really led as a city. And other ministers, like I was just in Puerto Rico, people were talking about, you guys were the first city to pass good cause eviction. You guys did inclusionary zone. So, other people are paying attention to the decisions that we make. I just want to say, if we cannot find the money in this budget, like what Megan Keegan said, particularly, if we are not able to, find funding for ethics and the CPRB and the vacancy study all at once, I am in favor of, really focusing on the workforce and ethics and the vacancy studies. CPRB is coming into the city. Let's see how that goes, and maybe we can increase their budget next year. But I think that right now, the residents of the city of Albany, and as I drive and I walk around this city, the number one issue that is brought to my attention is housing affordability. People are struggling in silence. People are struggling every single day to figure out where they're going to sleep, if their rent is going to go up. All these things are really at the forefront of the conversation in our city. So personally, if we cannot find money in the budget, I really think we should just focus on the workplace ethics report and focus on the vacancy study. I'm sorry, I'll say it publicly. CPRB, I appreciate the work that you're doing. You guys are coming into the city, and if we have to choose between funding CPRB and a vacancy study, I choose the vacancy study any day.
Thank you, Councilmember Nane. Councilmember Ballerin.
I'm going to reemphasize, I think we can find the money I'm confident we can find the money to make it work. Like, I don't think we need to start putting vulnerable communities versus other vulnerable communities. I really don't think we want to get into that. I think if we can take a second, look at everything, look at all the numbers, and then let's see where we can get the numbers. I'm going to be honest with you. That $6 million that they said that they were going to get, that I didn't think was going to happen, I think it's going to be more. We're already going to surplus this budget because of it. So I think we should look at all the numbers, put them on the table, and have a conversations. And I don't want to put one versus other. I don't want to get to that until we have everything on the table, please.
Okay. Thank you. And just here is where I am. Again, I think the mayor has made her stances clear. I think she said she wouldn't support a second vacancy study. I also know that we have 5 confirmed council members that are opposed. So while we can attempt to pursue, I think we need to be honest with ourselves that she might veto, and I don't know that this is veto proof. So I'm putting that into the conversation this evening. Okay. Another one that has been so patiently waiting, our city clerk. Will you please provide us more information on the technology request?
Yes, so the technology request from Ramisha, our violence prevention coordinator, currently they're holding the meetings at the Delaware Ave Library branch where they don't have equipment access provided by the library. So in order for them to continue their meetings to go live, she will need a new laptop. The current laptop that was issued by the city constantly gives her issues when she's conducting those meetings. She'll also need speakers, a projector, and cameras in order to maintain the live feed during the meetings.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for that. And I also think we were questioning the, I think you had additional technology requests for city clerk above and beyond. Was that what you were referring to?
This one is for specifically for the Violence Prevention Task Force. The need for the city clerk's office is in regards to the animal control for the licensing. That's the only additional equipment that we will.
Okay, there wasn't, just to make sure we're fully covering, you know, the needs of your office. I thought we discussed some of maybe the FOIA databases or something.
Yeah, so the FOIL database, we got the quote and I don't have it in front of me, but there is going to be a 5% increase on the amount that we paid last year. That's a increase that they've already confirmed on top of what the traditional bill would be. And then also the BAS licensing system, that's the general licensing service system that we use to maintain the marriage licenses, animal control, domestic partnerships, and so forth and so on.
And I believe that there's additional ask for those to maintain or continue the use of those two systems, additional ask above and beyond what's in your current budget.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
So the additional ask would be on top of what's budgeted. My increase would be up to $23,000.
23,000 would be your total ask
That's
for
the
that
total
line?
ask,
Okay.
yes. Because currently right now it's budgeted at 15
15
for the year.
Okay. $8,000.
Yes.
Plus the 8,900 for the animal control, plus the 9,000 furniture and fixtures.
Correct.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And without making assumptions, is the committee supportive of all of those increases? Perfect. Okay. Me as well. So we will proceed forward with those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Councilmember Farrell.
And I apologize ahead of time because I am about to kind of not throw a giant wrench in things, but when it comes to the housing study, and I would like I'll reach out to UT to try to get some of their data with the ROPs with that, because that to me is relevant to hear, like if they have specific examples of uninhabitable buildings that we counted, I think that would be helpful. But I'm not comfortable putting something in the budget saying that we should definitely do another housing study. I've not seen, if I could finish, I would love it. So nobody raise their hands, just let me say my words. Because I have not seen anything yet that actually shows that we would get any different results. I just don't feel confident about that. Are there questions? Yes, and I think that those are important to get answered. Perhaps there does need to be one. If I was to make a split-second decision right now, I would not agree that we needed a new study. However, the thing that I would argue is we are in a housing crisis and we need to be doing something different with housing. I personally, I think having $125,000 to do something towards the housing crisis. We have we have more data that's coming from, because the neighborhood services did a much broader housing study too. They're still getting all of that information together with. I guess the Office of Audit is also doing one. I don't love the idea of not having something in the budget to allow us to react to this additional data and do something. I honestly do not believe a new housing study by anybody else would get us anything different. And I don't love the idea of spending money on that. But I also don't love the idea of the status quo with housing. So I'm open to the idea of putting money in the budget that could potentially be used for a housing study if we actually get into the data and it looks like we need to do one, but could also potentially be used for something else. Because that to me is, like, that's the issue. If we get this data in and then it turns out that we need to do this, I feel like we've got a big, huge conversation that we need to have, and I don't know who can lead it. Like, I would love to have a consultant come in and actually bring everybody together. Small-time landlords, like, I have outreach from people talking about how, you know, like, they're selling their properties. They don't want to be a small-time landlord anymore. We need small landlords. We need people to own property. We need to answer the questions for affordable housing, but also it's not even affordable housing. It's housing across the board. There's just so many issues. Homelessness is an issue. Like, all of this is a huge issue, and I think it's a big conversation that needs to happen. My preference would be to do this due diligence that we do not have time for, to look at this additional data on the ROPs. And then if we don't need a housing study, to actually have somebody come in and bring a bunch of people together to find solutions, because we're not finding solutions. And no matter what happens, I understand it's 10%. It's not 10% of our people, it's 10% of our rentable housing. I think that's a very important thing to distinguish the difference between those two. But I don't know that this is a big solution, and I think we need to find one. When it comes to cost-benefit analysis, I think that we're better off spending $125,000, or, you know, I don't know how much it would cost, but I think we're way better off putting money towards actually bringing people together for a conversation, for real solutions, with specific things that we can do. I don't know that a new housing study is going to solve it. I really don't. And I think we need to work towards it.
So a couple thoughts that then I'm going to go Councilmember Ballard and Councilmember Keegan. I think I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Farrell. I also think that there is a council plan to further deep dive, right? We had a conversation tonight, but not everyone was here. You want to further deep dive the results of the vacancy study in committee, right, in housing committee post our budget vote. So if there is more due diligence on our part to be had to determine do we or do we not proceed, I do kind of feel like more generalized language with the possibilities is a better route to go in this case. I also just want to note that our city auditor is again performing a housing audit, and the scope of that audit is to examine, the objectives of that audit are to examine the current housing market and historical trends, determine how the city of Albany is identifying and addressing housing challenges and needs, and analyze the impact of city policies, programs, and practices to determine the impact on housing accessibility and its future implications. So while on one front we still want to have further discussions on the deep dive of the vacancy study and the path forward there, even if we were not to go down the path of that additional study, allocating those funds towards housing when also getting the results of this housing audit, I think would prove beneficial to us as council members to try to address the housing crisis that we are in. So I would be in favor of what Councilmember Farrell just outlined. I'm going to go to Councilmember Ballard and then Councilmember Keegan.
Two things. One, thank you both to both of you Councilmember Frederick and Farrell, just to be clear on the record, both of you have been strong advocates for this for years. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear on the record, that both of you have been strong advocates, both of you have gone into those rooms that we don't all go to get the funding time and time again. So I appreciate your commitment to this issue, and I appreciate your work on it. You know, I understand where everybody's coming from. Look, I believe we should do, and I'm not afraid to say it, I think we should have a second view at this issue, specifically another survey. But I also understand that it's 9 o'clock at night, and we've got to pass a budget, and we've got a division. So I am open to a compromise to get us to move forward. You know, a compromise can be where we put $125,000 in the budget that is under the control of the City Council for the Housing Committee to take a look at this and all of our housing issues and see how to invest that dollars. And there maybe a survey, maybe another, I'm sorry, it's 9 o'clock at night and it may be a other vacancy study, and it may not. But at least that puts the money in the budget for us to continue this conversation and allow the process to move forward, and allow the Housing Committee, which is, you know, which on this issue is pretty split. I feel bad for the one council member that hasn't really shared their position, but that's okay, because it's good to have both viewpoints in the room having that conversation, but allows us to move forward on this issue. So if that is a compromise others are willing to move forward with, that's a compromise I can live with, as long as it's clear that it's based on what the committee decides and then the council votes on, and it doesn't say it cannot be a vacancy study if the committee feels that that is something that is worth that investment.
Okay. Additional comments on this topic? Councilmember Keegan.
I am far more inclined to move in the direction that Councilmember Farrell has suggested. I do not support redoing the vacancy study. I feel like the folks that are in opposition to the vacancy study are, I feel like we're reading two different reports. And we don't get to take public tax dollars and spend them because we don't like the results of a report that came in. And I stand very firmly by that opinion. And I am deeply concerned about the treatment of our Department of Neighborhood and Community Services and our staff, and actually wildly offended by how they have been treated by the advocacy groups in this process. It's very clear in that report that they made every effort to verify utilizing data that they had access to, which included looking at records of units that were accessing water through AWD, and units that had police response calls in order to verify occupancy and verify response rates from landlords. And the implication that they somehow favor data towards landlords is wildly offensive to me. My concern with, I think if we're going to put something in the budget, it needs to be explicit, and it needs to be explicit what we're utilizing those funds for. I would not want to see us put $125,000 in and then have that utilized for a vacancy study after the fact. I would not be comfortable with that. My other concern is, while I think that that is incredibly important and incredibly useful, it would be more so useful once we get the results from the auditor's office. And the auditor's office typically takes 1 to 2 years to entirely complete an audit. So my other concern is, you know, it'd be one thing if we knew that they were going to be able to get this all done by, say, this coming fall, and we'd be able to hire a consultant to assist us in analyzing that and making policy recommendations from that. But I don't want to have duplicate efforts happening on both sides. Like, I don't want to hire a consultant to duplicate what the auditor's office is doing. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but.
It does, but and I'm sorry, but we don't know the timeline of the auditor's report, and it's also, as I said, Neighborhood Services is doing, like, we will have data from them likely well before that. This is our opportunity to have funding in the budget, and from my perspective, similar to the workforce ethics, I would rather have something in the budget so that we have the ability to respond to the data, or we have the ability. I mean, I don't want to wait another year with that. I would prefer to put something in the budget now instead of.
Yeah. And if we were to put that in as more of a general item, if the council were to then pursue a vacancy study, I would think that we would need to do a secondary vote on that as a body to then use those earmarked funds. So it's more, at that point, it's not, we're not saying that it's going to be applied to the study. It would need to then go through our process of getting approval via via majority of the 15 council members. So,
we can put that language in the actual, not even, I mean, obviously our budget intent resolution, but that's not binding. We can actually put it in the budget language that this funding would have to be, like, whatever the use would have to be voted on by the council.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you. I just want to make one quick comment. I mean, the city is not, we've done and taken votes twice when needed. I mean, if we look at the Albany High on Washington Avenue, that failed its first vote. And it went to a second vote. And if we didn't have that second vote, we wouldn't have that building. So it's not uncommon for government to relook, regroup, and take second votes on issues. So this allows us that opportunity. Thank you.
Councilmember Nani.
Yeah, I just want to, since I got to this chamber, my mentor always tells me that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think this is a good compromise. There were some remarks regarding the auditor's housing study, but it seemed like it's already started because, I don't know, I got this paper and it says January 1 of 2019. So I think it's not going to take as long as, the audits typically take, because it seemed like they already started with the audit, unless I'm reading it wrong. But again, I think this is a good compromise, and if it goes to the housing committee where there's further discussion about it, and let's say they make the determination that, the vacant study, it comes in front of the council for a vote. But I totally understand. I just want to thank my colleagues for really thinking outside the box. We are in a housing crisis. Anything we could do to really help tenants or even create homeowners is a step in the right direction. Because if you don't have housing, you don't have nothing. I think that's the basis, especially when you think about our kids and families, with school disruption, et cetera. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, and here's my other position on this as well. I think we're reaching an end point on this piece, but again, the administration, the mayor has made it very clear where she stands on a secondary study, and so she does have line item veto power. By generalizing this, I think we have more, while we are united as while we will hopefully be united as a council, we also have more protection when we go through the official budget process with the administration. So that's another thing that I think is beneficial to this, because we are still sorting this out as a body, but this will be allocated towards housing. Okay. Any other comments on this one?
Oh, no.
Okay. So the last one that we did talk about last time that I do want to just bring back into the fold is the CPRB, and it's not lost that they had a $129,000 decrease, and we did discuss a potential increase last conversation. We did not discuss the full amount because we do understand that we have a lot of budgetary asks, but we did generally land, I think, around a $70,000 increase to contracted services based on what we could break down and see where the needs may truly be. And so I do think that this is something I would still like to pursue, but again, the next step in this process is meeting with the budget director, meeting with the administration, and finding the appropriate accounts to take from to fund these items. So I don't want I would say the conversation tonight shouldn't be CPRB to zero, but it should be a conversation around having more flexibility with that number if needed. Councilmember Keegan.
I think my largest concern with the requests that they have, and I think Councilmember Farrell kind of got to the point on this, is that their request for contractual services technically duplicates their request for staffing and salaries. And I think we can all agree that because they're in transition, they are going to have some overlap this year in terms of the consulting support as they transition to a fully staffed department. But I would want to ensure, however we word this, that there's a time limit, that they're not going to engage themselves in signing a one-year contract with that company. Because that was the other thing that sort of came up, is that they were getting ready to re-sign their agreement, which would put us in a position to kind of be stuck in a way.
So are you proposing language, see, I don't know, are you proposing language in the budget intent memo to clarify that their contract should not span the full year and be maybe quarterly or month to month?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Farrell.
So I know that we talked more about in the contracted services, but we also had discussed briefly the community outreach specialist, and we didn't necessarily agree on that one way or another. I will say, I definitely want to make sure the CPRB has everything that they need. But to Councilmember Anane's point, they are coming into the city. So I think we need to make sure that that bridge is there with the contracted services. I also agree that there should be an end with that. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but their entire thing, I would not be in favor of funding, especially because it's not a request that feels based on what they actually need, but it feels a lot more based on getting exactly $804,000, which that to me is not necessarily like, that's just trying to get a number, and that's not what's needed, especially when we have some things that are, from my perspective, a much higher priority. So I would definitely like to look at having more of the contracted services, but I'm also very open to the community outreach specialist. From my perspective, although the CPRB has a unique role, the outreach to the community, there's a lot of healing that needs to be done that is just broader, and having a group, the CPRB, continue that community outreach, I think that helps our city. I just do. So I don't mind that position. I'm also, in terms of what's important to me in our budget asks, it's not something I'm gonna like, I need to have this, but just to mention that.
Thank you. Councilmember Ballerin, then Councilmember Keegan.
Thank you. I apologize, I don't have my notes from that meeting. I do remember them stating that because they were coming in-house, there was a lot of support that they've used to get from the Albany Law School that they won't get at this point. And so they're gonna have to make up that infrastructure. I also remember that they hadn't put down for their staff the pension requirements, which when we put it in was an additional $70,000, you know, to make up that gap. And it may have been the 70,000 may have been the pension plus I think the 15,000 for the health insurance for the part-time staff member if they work more than 20 hours. So I just want us to take that into consideration that even though they budgeted for 104, if you actually look at their total potential expenses, it would be closer to 175 or higher. But I also think it is reasonable for us to look at the fact that they're not going to have all of those positions filled right away, to be able to give them a number that I think will allow them to do what they're looking to do and bring in the staff that they're looking to do at the most reasonable manner.
Thank you. Councilmember Keegan.
Again, I kind of then question, well, what do we have a program director for if we're hiring? I mean, to me, that role, that community engagement role, is something that the program director should be undertaking. And I would like to see us get through a year and for the program director to really make a strong argument as to why they're unable to do that community meeting piece that is part of their job description as it's written, and why they would need additional staff support. You know, again, I'm not saying that we wouldn't be putting that into a budget increase request for next year, starting in June. I just don't know that we necessarily need to prioritize that particular position for this year. I would agree that having some contracted expenses to get them through the first 6 months of this transition is probably important. But, you know, I am concerned about the concept that they believe that they're going to be able to renew this contract year to year and have both full-time staff in the city and contracted staff doing duplicate work. I don't think that's fair to the tax-paying public. And what they were arguing in the meeting is that they felt that the ERS that we built into their budget should be taken out and put somewhere else. And I don't agree with that at all. So that, I mean, that's just, and I do think that some of their contracted services can and likely will be made up by the fact that we're not necessarily going to be fully staffed in Q1, likely will be fully staffed in Q2. But I do think that we need to build a little bit more cushion for contracted services into their budget. That's my opinion.
So I think that's a consensus of this group here. So we are this committee here. So we're going to increase contracted services. Again, I don't know the conversation that is yet to be had with the administration and our budget director around our total amendments. However, would this committee be comfortable with saying a range of 40 to 70,000?
I would be comfortable with the higher range of 70 if possible.
And Councilmember Ballerin, if I can, understanding that perspective of 70,000, if we had to give elsewhere, I know you don't think that there's a need to give elsewhere, but would you prioritize that 30,000 differential over something else?
Well, I'm looking at, look, based on the conversation, I think people are saying they shouldn't have the outreach. That was about $21,000 in expenses. So you take the $21,000 out, and that's what I thought I heard, that people didn't think they should have the outreach staff member.
So if you were to take,
That was a $21,000 salary, if I remember correctly.
yes,
And
and then
the
there,
benefits, the fringe, and all the other stuff.
but you're also, we're not gonna, I mean, there is not a lot of fat in our budget. So if we're allocating funding towards, housing policy, that also cuts into how we're allocating funding for the CPRB.
So I get that. I'm looking at one at a time. I'm looking at one at a time, and I'm looking at this one specific, and I'm looking at the 21,000 for the salary. I'm looking at the 17,000 for the, I think that was the health insurance, and then I'm saying about 8,000 for fringe. That gets you close to the $50,000 mark, reduction from the 120 that they're asking for. So that's how I got to my closer to my 70. Does that make any sense? So, okay, so the salary, again, I'm going based on what I remember on the spreadsheet. 21,000 for salary, 17,000 for health insurance, about 8,000 for FICO. So you add all that up. So this is what I'm looking at. This is what I'm looking at. So I don't know if I have different documentations than what you guys have. Okay. Can I get a copy of that? I'm looking at this. This is what I'm looking at. So I may be looking at something different than what you're looking at. It's on my desk? Okay, sorry. That's what happens when you go from one desk to another desk with a whole lot of paperwork. So I apologize for that. Well, basically what I'm looking at is 120,990 was the request. Okay.
Where's that?
I guess my question is, do we have their proposal? Do we have a copy of their proposal? If you don't mind, because I want to make sure I'm going with, look, I think my memory's pretty good, but it is 9 o'clock at night. So I'm open to documentation of that. But I guess my long and short, I was deducting what that cost of that one staff member would be between salary, health insurance, FICO, and so forth, to be roughly about 50,000, which is why what I'm looking at is 120,000 minus 50 would be closer to the 70. So that's how I came up with my number.
I'm not going to disagree with 70, Councilmember Ballerin, but I do think I need to be able to be equipped with a range. When we as a committee and a body just talked about, or the body that was here, just talked about the necessity for the ethics and workforce, the necessity for the housing. So I will attempt for 70, but I would like some leeway on this item. Councilmember Keegan.
I think maybe what the issue is, because Councilmember Ballerin couldn't make our last meeting, is that what we agreed to play around with was the contracted expenses, and that we were not going to play around with anything else. So their request for contracted expenses was an increase of 93,000. And what we're talking about is agreeing to come to a compromise of increasing that somewhere between 40 and 70,000, and to forego the remainder of what they requested.
Unfortunately, when that meeting was added, I had already made a commitment outside of the city, so I was unable to make that meeting last week. So I will take that and just ask that best we can to try to get it closer to the higher number. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we've reached an endpoint on our proposed amendments that are going to be pursued for this budget. I know we're at 9:30. I do want to take some time to transition to our budget intent memo that you all have a copy of. I spoke too soon. What we did not discuss, that I said that we would discuss this evening, is PEG. Is there, we had public comment referring to increased funding for Channel Albany. Does anyone on this committee have any comments? Councilmember Keegan.
I mean, I understand where the board is coming from, but again, I kind of come back to the board had an opportunity to approach us and talk to us about the budget that they wanted. It really shouldn't be a new thing. I mean, I understand that this particular board member may be a new individual, but we haven't received a budget request or really any communication from the board in terms of what they need, what they want, and where they want this to go. And I personally think that that's where we need to start, is to have a solid conversation with the PEG board about what their plans are.
Councilmember Farrell.
As somebody who doesn't like watching things, I am the worst person ever in this, but I honestly don't understand the point. And I understand the point of public access, but not specifically with PEG, because with PEG, you have to have cable. More and more people are getting rid of cable. It's just not something that people are utilizing. So I would be a lot more open to a budget request if it was just, we want to put things on a YouTube channel. It's based on a very specific thing that is based on somebody having cable. All of the different requests that we have, which to Councilmember Keegan's point, are not from people specifically on the board. Me personally would be a lot more open to it if it was not specifically for cable. And when it's not specifically, I totally understand the point of public access. That's why we have we've got a ton of public access now, and I'd love to see more of it, but not specifically with this. And I do agree it would be helpful to get something specifically from the board. So,
Councilmember Keegan.
I would just also note that we are now on cable because our staff fixed that issue. So our meetings, at least, are now all live aired on television. Correct, Brian? You fixed it, and now we're airing on TV as well?
We are. When the stream cuts, it cuts on television, just because their system isn't able to recognize that we come back online. But we are streaming, I think, on the education channel regularly now.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
And I do also just want to point out that we would probably have to increase their PEG access funds by 105, just because of the cable franchise agreement. So that's also reflected in the spreadsheet as an increase to PEG equipment. So it's net neutral. Revenue neutral. Sorry.
But it has to be specifically spent on equipment. It can't be spent
Capital
on salary.
expenditures.
Yeah, it can't be spent on salary. So, I mean, I guess for me, what I would love for us to be doing with our allocation, because we do get a considerable amount of funding, what I would love to see from the board is a plan for, you know, how we would increase community coverage of city government, right? Because that's, and what's happening in city government. And you have community media entities that are operating and able to do this. You know, it would cost us a lot to build a program that, to me, exists within community groups already. I'd rather see us, you know, create grant funding allocation via PEG for actual media coverage of city governance, because that's really the issue that community members are getting at, is why aren't we having greater community engagement and coverage of what's happening in the city of Albany and in city government? And I think that that's a really great direction, but I think that they need to hash that out with us, and we need to figure out a way to build it into the budget. And that's not for this year. I don't have a problem with making the budget switch for the cable franchise agreement, but the rest of it, I need a more solid plan for what they want to do, and I think it needs to be built into the budget from the get-go.
Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you. I think, you know, yes, they're going to get the $105,000 for equipment based on the franchise agreement that we voted on last week, so that will be additional resources for them. I think what we should do, and maybe put in our memo, is ask that, you know, the PEG board, maybe, or the chair of the PEG board come, you know, before the finance committee during the budget season, just so we can get a clear understanding of what the board is looking to move forward in their mission. I know it's a good group of volunteers that give a lot of their time for our city, and we're very appreciative for all of that, that willingness to do that work. So I think it would be something maybe we'd like to add in our memo, just so that we can have them come in, or at least get some type of a statement of what they would like, what would the board like from the council, so we get a bit of a clearer definition from them. Thank you.
That is well noted. So to the budget intent memo, I will add a section for PEG that references the council's appreciation of the board and the efforts, our interest in them modernizing to enhanced vehicles towards getting out media, concerted effort towards increasing city government streaming, and encourage them to come in front of our body next budget season with no increase other than the net neutral change that our legislative director discussed. Councilmember Keegan.
Can we also put a tickler into our calendar to try and coordinate perhaps a joint finance? I don't know who's on the PEG ad hoc committee, but to invite the board in for a joint meeting like in June-ish, so that we can start working with them on the issue in the development of the 2026 budget.
I mean, I can definitely see what their availabilities are like.
No. No.
No.
I think it's a great idea for them to come in front of us next budget season as a board with their request. Okay.
If I may too, just the other adjustments that are on here, they're based off needs that I've recognized in trying to work with the PEG board since earlier this year. Some of their requests are more appropriate for supplies materials, but they've been just this year they've waffled between contracted services and equipment, when sort of standard cables don't necessarily qualify well as equipment or a contracted service. So I would just ask if we could consider those neutral changes as well.
I'd be fine with that.
And what I would say is, we have, as a body, a lot of meetings and a lot of important things to focus on, and I am not saying that it's not important, but for us to have another meeting and a joint committee meeting, that is not something that I would personally love to do. However, I do think that maybe we could ask them to come to a caucus so that there is a conversation. I think having a conversation would be helpful, but I would rather have it, like, maybe we could invite them to a caucus that we don't have a lot going on and see maybe if there's just a broader conversation that we could have with the specific PEG Access Board, not necessarily people that are not on the PEG Access Board.
I'm fine with that. It's just more of a, I would like to see what their thoughts are for the future of PEG and what it would cost to build out those processes. And I don't care if it happens in a caucus. It doesn't matter to me. I would prefer to have that conversation as we're building the budget, not after the budget's built.
Okay. All right. I think we're at a good stopping point here to transition to our budget intent memo, resolution 123, 111, 24R. So what I'm going to do is just give you a brief overview of what we have. I have no expectation that you have read this, because this was just this draft was just finalized prior to our meeting. But I do want to talk through this, so with the goal to address anything potentially that is missing, and then ultimately hopefully vote out the ordinance and the resolution. There's a new, yep. I have it. Thank you. Okay, so just from the top, we have our standard statement of the council. We address our public comments and our public hearings. In that, I do address the particular public comments and public hearing items that we covered, that we heard, including the settlement of outstanding union contracts, increase to pay for blue-collar workers, support for additional external vacancy study, the revisit for bathhouse number 2, and to provide additional recreation to Albany South End, support for enhanced funding to the Community Police Review Board, and support for enhanced funding to Channel Albany. Am I missing anything from public comments that we heard? Okay. So I have that. Yep. Okay, so if we flip to the next page, then we get into the meat of our items. So we have our support for Albany's fair share. So we acknowledge the increase to the funding level of $5 million.
I did just think the gentleman that came in to talk about Bleecker, is that in here?
It is not, and that is something that Councilmember Robinson, although not here with us this evening, he has provided a excerpt that we are going to add in here as well.
Awesome.
But we'll add it to the public comment section as well.
Great.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so we acknowledge the increase to the funding level. We wholeheartedly support that effort to combine, and we acknowledge that we are, as the capital, we are uniquely burdened with 60% of property tax exemption. So we support the permanency that is being pursued, as well as furthermore, we hope for if that state funding does become permanent in future years, that the state would revisit it at certain points in time to appropriately adjust and increase based on the city tax exemptions and needs. Anything in number Roman numeral 1 that we should add? Okay. Roman numeral 2, tax levy increase. So we recognize the tax levy increase of 2%. We acknowledge the homestead, non-homestead, and ultimately that the burden for the adjustment is placed more so on the non-homestead portion. But we do also acknowledge the reassessment and the fact that our homesteads are burdened. We have a growing concern with the property taxes, but we understand the necessity to increase for this year. Comments on that? Okay. Next section, we acknowledge ARPA. We acknowledge the need to spend the funds by December 31st, 2026, and appreciate that the administration has considered that and appropriately has a plan to do so. We also would like to see new federal funding, generally speaking, for federal and state to help support the Albany for All initiative. Roman numeral 4, the revenue streams. I'm going to stop saying Roman numeral because I can't say it right now. So this is an open item. I want to generally acknowledge the concern that we have as a body about our city's revenue. Acknowledge the speed camera revenue, which is a good addition to help balance the budget. However, also want to add language here around the landfill concern in the future that we have there, while recognizing that we are ideally not placing that burden on our residents through additional tax increases for revenue. Thoughts there? Good? Okay. Then we get into a safer Albany. We refer to the fact that shooting incidents have been up 34% since 2023. We acknowledge the vacancies that we have in the police department and the overall concerns that has towards our overall safety. We also acknowledge the collaboration with the Community Police Review Board and our Violence Prevention Task Force and the work that they will be doing. Yes, Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you. I know we spoke about this during the police department's presentation. I know, is it possible to put together a resolution in addition to this, maybe even coming from the full finance committee, asking the state to look at the pensions of the police officers, to create a program to help cities create more incentives with the pension program so that it goes from 50-50 to maybe 60-50 to encourage more officers to stay. I remember when we had the conversation, the main issue was how it would be funded, but I think this is a statewide issue. So if the state can make it so it's a shared city, they can come up with some funding so it becomes a shared burden. I think that would help lessen the fact that we lose people when they hit 20 years. And these guys are young. I'm talking about guys retiring, which is great. I mean, great. But guys retiring at 42, 43, they still have a good energy, and we're losing people that know the neighborhoods. So if we can do something separate, maybe as a committee or a body. Thank you.
Councilmember Ballerin, I think I can add to this particular section our interest in pursuing a resolution in support of, to the state in support of revisiting the pension plan, and then we can work on that after the budget as well for that particular resolution. Okay. Number 6, building a better community. So this addresses the steps towards West Hill and the future Albany South. We also acknowledge the Lincoln Park pool that will open again in July. We're grateful for the state's investment through the New York State Swims grant. And then we also, at the request of Councilmember Johnson, continue the language that we had from last year that says the council hopes the administration will continue to look towards developing an additional South End Community Center to address the needs of historic disinvestment. Also to that section, this is where we will add the Bleecker write-up that Councilmember Robinson provided. Okay. Then we go into general council developments. Here we address enhancing the CPRB funding and the overall transition into the city. We also address the addition to the Violence Prevention Task Force to carry out their purpose with the funding. Then we get into our write-up provided by Councilmember Keegan, thank you very much, to address equity and inclusivity in our playgrounds. Then we get into our visions for our department. First with the Department of Engineering, again, provided right up by Councilmember Keegan. Thank you again for that. And then the following is our additional support for animal control. Here we acknowledge the additions that we have for the licenses, but we also here ask for the administration to consider additional positions within animal control that we agreed to previously, and the overall enhanced concern we have as a city related to our animal control crisis. A placeholder for a fire department that we will add for the training, a placeholder for the city clerk that we will add language on for the technology, furniture and fixtures, and then the housing vacancy. What is here is just the language from last year. What we will replace this with is general housing funding at
Yeah, that addresses the housing crisis.
Yep.
And that I do like the idea of, I don't remember if it was Councilmember Ballard or Councilmember Keegan's idea, but I'm gonna, Ballard Keegan's idea, that we vote on it as a council. I think that that's a way that we can ensure accountability for the different council, because we do have a divided council on this. And I think that that would also give the administration some confidence with it as well.
Great.
I think if we have it go to the housing committee, and whatever comes out of the housing committee should get a full vote from the full body. So I agree.
Yep. And then we end with our general charter reform statement that we've had for a bit, that we need to revisit our overall budgetability, but we do acknowledge that we have some post-budget oversight with Council President and Chair of Finance serving on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. Somewhere in here, I again will add a memo about the PEG board that in Channel Albany that we just discussed. Okay, so anything missing?
The ethics and workforce audit?
Yes.
Is that in?
Yes, thank you. If you would like to. Waste management. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Anything else missing? As soon as possible. I would love to get out, my goal was to get out a final version to council members on Friday so that they had the weekend to review prior to our vote Monday. I understand. Okay. I should have started with this, but I do want to give a special shout out to our legislative director, Brian Jimenez, who was very, very integral, not only in the drafting of this budget intent memo, which is a lot of work, but also this overall budget process. Extremely detailed, extremely thoughtful, and really helped guide us through this process. I feel like I want to shed a tear because we're reaching the end of budget, but hopefully. But so what I would be looking for, again, thank you, Brian, for all of your efforts and everything that you've done in this process. What I would be looking for now before we are able to conclude is a pass out of committee pending amendments, resolution 121, 11124R, and ordinance 28-10124.
Sure, I move that we move with a passive recommendation resolution 123, 11124R.
Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. Resolution 123, 11124R passes out of committee pending pending amendments. And then do I have a motion for ordinance 28-101-24? Okay, motion from Councilmember Keegan. Is there a second?
Second.
And that is with a positive recommendation.
Positive recommendation. Just to clarify. Yep. Okay, so positive recommendation, motion, move out of committee from Councilmember Keegan with a second from Councilmember Baller, and all those in favor? Aye. Ordinance 28-101-24, pending amendments, passes out of committee with a positive recommendation. Okay.
Could I make a motion that we adjourn?
Absolutely.
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second? Second to adjourn? Second from Councilmember Keegan. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone. This work is not easy, but it's a very important committee. We do a lot of due diligence on our city's budget and make sure that our taxpayer dollars are going to the right items. So appreciate all of your efforts and understand that it was a late night, especially this evening. And I'll see you on Monday.